Ping! I love that. Kia ora koutou katoa. So, RaC Guild number 4. Welcome, everybody. Yes, Alfred. Alfred is traveling at the moment. Philippa is traveling. So some of our community are out of their home zone doing some exciting stuff, which hopefully they'll tell us about later. But we've got a few new faces in the room. Maybe you have a chance to introduce yourself. After, we've got 2 great presentations this evening. One from Tim de Sousa, What's in it for us? A cost-benefit analysis of rules of code transformation, which I've been reading some of Tim's stuff today, and it's really good. So that's going to be great. And before him, Michael Pronin from GovCMS Rules as Code project, talking about the Sandpit projects that he's got going on. So we'll bowl straight into it, if you don't mind, and then there'll be time for Q&A after each of our presenters this evening, and then we can introduce ourselves and maybe find out a bit more about what everybody's doing at that point. Good with everybody? Rules of the evening? Wonderful, cool. Michael, where are you?
Okay, I'm very new to Google Meet, so hopefully this is going to work. Can you see?
Perfect.
See Sharon?
Yes.
We can.
Just before I start, also on the call, I've got one of my staff members, Jaden Tarrigan, who's still at uni, and remarkably, he's actually doing a Rules as Code project at Canberra University. So it's penetrated into some of our universities here in Australia. All right, so I'm going to talk about the Rules as Code Sandpits we've done in conjunction with Sousa, but first I thought I would just position who we are and why we're doing this. So basically, so I'm Michael Pronin, work as a project manager for the Department of Finance here in Canberra, Australia. And we run this thing called GovCMS, which stands for the Government Content Management Service. On the screen is another New Zealander, Sharon Clarkson, who is our team lead, our visionary, and who basically created all of this. So what is GovCMS? It basically is a shared service, government-run content management service. It's all open source based on Drupal primarily. We run on Amazon Web Services, and we have SaaS and PaaS versions. I won't go through all of this, but the key thing is these numbers down the bottom. We've got 362 live websites, 30 in development, 116 organisations using the system. Now that's government agencies, so federal government, state government, and even some councils. And it's probably the largest web hosting service, certainly by far and away the largest government web hosting service in Australia. And we get northwards of 1 billion page hits per year. So right at the very top of the screen, you'll see interested in Rules as Code, find out more about Rules as Code and GovCMS platform. I won't get there. I'm actually going to go straight into the demos, because I think the demos are probably more interesting for people. Can people see my screen with final entitlements estimator in the middle?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a Drupal form which is connected to a OpenFisca backend. I'll actually show you in a little diagram what it sort of looks like. So these are our Sandpits. So basically the Sandpits are mini projects. What we decided to do in Department of Finance was to sponsor up to 30 Sandpits. So this is really aimed at kickstarting the rules as code process within federal government here in Australia. So rather than providing the sort of service which people could buy, we in Department of Finance have basically commissioned SALSA to develop a number of these sandpits, and we've been offering them to our agencies, our departments who we work with, well, at no charge. So it's a limited amount of work which can be done. So they're proof of concepts. They're standing alone from the our GovCMS system, but the eventual aim is to have them connected into the GovCMS system, where we'll have we need to move to production. It's a sort of GovCMS is a classified system. It's security rated, and to add any new features, and this would be a new feature, has to go through a range of enterprise grade quality and security sort of checks. So basically, we have the basic sandpits consist of a Drupal website, OpenFisca backend, and says some questions, some rules, and I'll show you what it sort of looks like. This particular website is sort of a template which SALSA provides, so they make it sort of look nice. They've got a few little diagrams here. There's information here about what rules as code is, about examples, various examples. Some of these you probably would be aware of: the French example, the benefit me in New Zealand, the benefits launch, or the benefits one. There is actually more of these around, and also some information about OpenFisca. OpenFisca being the rules engine originally developed by the French government. So I'll give you two examples. So this final entitlements estimator, it's designed for a particular use case, which is for the employees under the MOPs Act, we call it. So MOP stands for Member of Parliament Staff Act. So the parliamentarians here in Canberra have staff members. There's some of them have quite a lot of them, and basically they have got particular employment rules and regulations, and in fact legislation. For example, if the member who employs them gets voted out, all the employees lose their jobs pretty much on the spot. So there's those type of unique employment conditions which apply to MOPS Act stuff. There's also an enterprise agreement, so all sorts of payments and things like that. So the purpose of this particular entitlements estimator is that often when there's, say, an election or some other sort of event which occurs and there's a mass, a large amount of people losing their jobs all at the same time, especially if there's a change of government, the team who runs this process gets overwhelmed with people wanting to know how much am I entitled to. So it asks questions. I'll just put my name in. And it says what type of employment you have. So if you say you're a casual, you're thrown out immediately. It says casual employees aren't entitled to anything. So that sort of stops the process, and that avoids the phone calls and emails and whatever else which happens. So if we say we're ongoing, now this is a limited set of things. There's actually a lot more classifications than this, but let's say we're a chief of staff. We're on the first pay point, and we work 35 hours a week. People are entitled to leave. So let's say we've got 200 hours of leave. And there is this thing called parliamentary staff allowance if you have to work late hours and things like that. So yes, we're getting that. Are you ceasing employing because your employee will cease to hold office? So your member has been terminated, lost their job, quit, and you've been working for them for 6 years. So that information is passed through to OpenFisca, which calculates against the rules and brings back the results. So it says you're entitled to $39,000. It's made up of these particular categories, and there's some severance benefit because you're an ongoing employee. You can look at the what information you put in to see whether you put it in incorrectly. And you can also view the rule statements to see what rules were actually applied. So this is a very sort of cut down version of this. There's many more classifications and many more pay rates, but this was done just to provide a proof of concept. Con or Alfred, do you want to say anything more about this?
No, I think you've done a good job of explaining it, better than obviously from a public servant point of view. You've got a lot more context and insight into how it all works. No, that's excellent. Thank you.
So the other example I was going to show was a one for our Department of Health, which is it's an eligibility checker. In fact, just before I show this one, I'll just mention some of the other use cases where we're working with. The eligibility use case is quite a common one. We're sort of following the lead of what our agencies want to do. I'll just give you a few other examples. With the federal court, we've done one on divorce eligibility, whether you're entitled to be eligible to be divorced. There's some interesting rules associated with that. Services Australia, who is our largest user, largest customer. They've got a very large site. They're looking at benefits entitlement. They're also, I guess, I don't know, struggling is the right word, but they have a lot of sort of service design issues as well, rather than just the technology working. We're also starting to work with our Department of Agriculture, who want to do their external exports. And that's an interesting one because the rules are not our rules. If you export from Australia to, say, China or the EU or the Middle East, you actually have to follow the rules which those jurisdictions apply. So this is an interesting case for us because we're actually using the rules of overseas jurisdictions, which are different to each other, for the benefit of our onshore exporters. And the final one I'll mention is we're doing quite a lot of work with our Department of Home Affairs. And they're interesting because they don't want to do, at this point in time, any sort of citizen-facing or business-facing things. They're actually doing digital twins, which in their world is doing a rules-less code based solution, which does things like goes through all of the things you need to do to get a visa, for example, a student visa. And that's quite a complex set of use case, complex set of rules. There's a whole bunch of evidence, health checks, a whole bunch of things which people need to do. There's weightings applied to the types of institutions, and they don't want to have it externally facing. They actually want it to run on their internal network so that their desk officers can basically have a digital representation of what they currently do in a manual fashion. And the other use case they're doing is with importing, similar thing, permits for importing of tobacco and vapes. So they're the sort of broad range of use cases we're working with. So with this one here, this is the Department of Health. Just checking in, everyone can still hear me? It's all working well?
Yep, all good.
Okay, all right. So this is a different sort of look and feel. It does check eligibility, but it's got this different sort of metaphor of answering questions. So once again, if you say you're not an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, they say, well, sorry, that's it, you're not eligible for anything. under this particular scheme. So Australia's got quite a advanced and involved social welfare service, and there's eligibility for a whole bunch of things. So if you say you are a Australian citizen and you're 64 years old, and it goes through a bunch of questions. This is, I guess, one of the areas which, from a sort of service design point of view, this is something we're still working through about how these things would be operationalized. Some of them work well, other ones, these initial screens can get a bit too busy. So we'll say we're not a member of the, but we'll say we don't have a pensioner card. And I'll say I don't have a spouse. I'm not an Aboriginal. And I'll say I'm not eligible for this, and I don't live in a remote community. So we'll see, am I eligible? So I'm not eligible. So once again, I can look at the rules, or I can go back, which is what I think I will do here. And in fact, I'll change my answers. I'm still an Australian citizen. I'll make myself 66. I'm not a member here. I'm not one of these, but I'll say I have got a pensioner card. I'll say I've got a spouse who's got a pensioner card. I'll say I'm an Aboriginal. I'm not doing one of these. So there's different rules. So the community development program is a particular program for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, which is not asked for the other ones. I'll say I am eligible for this, and I do live in a remote community. So I'll check my eligibility here. So I'm entitled to get a hearing voucher. I'm not totally sure what that is. And I'm also eligible for this community service obligation scheme because of these particular rules. Once again, I can look at what the rules were. The rules are actually broken up here because there's quite a few of them. So the particular rules which were, this is reflected in the legislation. They're listed out here so people can check how they've been assessed. And this is important for the explainability element. And also it tells us what my selections were in case I need to change that. So pretty much that's the end of the demonstration. So is there any questions about that?
Please put your hands up. And if you haven't, I've got a few that I wrote down. Nobody?
Joe, why don't you start? But then I do have some questions.
Awesome. Fabulous. I've got a few. Let me start with one, which is always a big deal from a community perspective, but I know everybody worries about it. Just confirm the GovCMS and privacy of the people that are using all of these sites and putting all of this information in. You don't have to log in to use any of these sites, right? So it's not identifying information.
That's right. I mean, with these are, as it says up the top here, these are proof of concept websites. These are here for demonstration purposes. In the fullness of time, they will integrate with our GovCMS service. Now, it's got a privacy impact assessment associated with it, and we have got strict privacy. We have got a Privacy Act and privacy rules. A lot about personally identifiable information, which all of our agencies are aware of. We tend to do things in some cases where we will go for informed consent. And in other cases, there is, under our privacy rules, privacy principles, which may be changing, but the current ones say basically if you have a need or a business reason, especially if it's based in legislation, like for example, with this hearing support, the legislation says that if you're say an Aboriginal, you're entitled to it, you are eligible for additional things, or particular additional rules apply. So in that case, we have a business requirement to ask those questions. And
Michael, I'll just jump in here.
Yeah.
Like with the MOPs example, you could put your name in, but that was included just for printing purposes. So people could print that as a PDF and see what they're eligible for. OpenFisca doesn't store any of these inputs. So it's all, it's only using them to calculate the rules. So there's not really any collection of information that we're doing, and we don't aim to collect any information either. So this isn't something that we're looking for, I guess, website personalization or personalized user journeys. It's more just to get the information or eligible, if people are eligible for services, to get that to people without them having to sign in.
From a privacy perspective, from a privacy perspective, you don't need to collect the personal information just to check eligibility. But of course, if they're eligible, then at some point they're going to need to provide personal information in order to apply. And there's a service design question as to whether you collect that before you check eligibility, as is currently done with the hearing voucher form, or after you've confirmed eligibility, because at least then you're only collecting the information of people who are in fact eligible. Otherwise, you're collecting a whole bunch of information from people who are not eligible, and then you've got to do something with it.
Cool. Tim, you had a question.
That was one of my questions.
Oh, cool.
But I can't help it. As a privacy professional, I am bound to ask it. But just to say that this looks really great, and it's really lovely to see how transparent and how traceable the decision making is. I was wondering if there are any specific thoughts about, for example, in the MOPs example, of how much of the question answers could be automated, for example, by I don't know, API access to Active Directory, where you can just put in the name or put in the email address and automatically fill out the length of tenure of the employee, their position, their leave entitlements. I'm wondering how much that's been considered, or whether that's being considered as future functionality.
All right, so I'll get Con to add to this, but it's certainly been considered. I mean, as Jaden said, the rules engine is transactional. It doesn't have a database associated with it. How what we're sort of looking at is how you have sort of reference data. For example, we're just looking at CSV files or things like that. In terms of integrating it with things like Active Directory or any other sort of data set, that's getting, in my mind, into sort of application territory, which a rules engine could be part of that flow. Where what we're doing here is very, very simple. I mean, it does. The general idea with rules as code is that, I mean, we're presenting it out here on Drupal forms, web forms. This could be going to a different application or a different program, which could be ingesting the stuff. So I think to have it as part of a broader process flow or part of an application set is feasible, but it's beyond the scope of what we're doing here at the moment.
Yeah.
Having said that, some of our more advanced agencies like Home Affairs and Services Australia are looking at that type of thing. But in all cases at the moment, it's not actually none of our use cases is to do an application as such. It's really to find out whether you're eligible to do an application.
Totally understand. I think with this particular example, like ministerial offices are too small, too fragmented to make configuring applications in that context for each one of them to be worth it. But the larger departments like finance or home affairs, if they're changing their staffing, I could kind of see it being very useful in that context.
Yes. What there is we do want to get into is the sort of the true legislation or regulations side of thing. I mean, the predominant use case is this sort of or the benefit to agencies is the sort of triaging, because they have to answer these questions anyway, or the users have to get to their sites and find a PDF form and read the PDF rules and understand that, and it just makes it easier. I mean, for example, we're just working with about to start working with the Air Force, and they have cadets who join them. They have to be 16 years old and there's a few other things you have to be, so they're going to have a simple sort of eligibility thing. And I mean, the final, if there is human interaction required, or there's a email generator or something like that, that can be the end result, as well as being presented back in a web form.
Very nice.
Cool. Yeah, very cool. Can I ask just 2 more questions? They're related, so it can be answered as one. Really interested in the multi-jurisdictional departments. That's fascinating. Like literally encoding other jurisdictions' rules that's great. That's network effects, right? Like you're sharing the work with another government. That's fabulous in terms of everything rules as code, right? Because it literally spreads the message. So what's next? You've got these these Sandpits up and running. Are you getting good feedback? Does this look like something that's going to be taken on and spread throughout the Australian government? Like, are you getting a good result?
I would say it's mostly good. It's not 100%. I mentioned that service design issue where the end result wasn't what people were expecting. They were looking for a different user journey, I guess. Having said that, some of the people, like both these ones I'm showing here, and another one, say with the federal court with their divorce eligibility, they're really keen to put these into production straight away. So next steps for us is to go through our production design and production implementation. That's going to take probably 6 months at least, and then it'll be a service which is offered on top of, as a feature on top of our GovCMS solution. The thing I will mention is that the rules as code is just the first of several sort of feature upgrades we're doing to GovCMS. Another one is to do with sharing and consolidating and syndicating content, and that's where flows between agencies is quite common. And what we're finding, what we're sort of becoming aware of, is that in a number of cases, the rules, the legislation is actually managed by one agency, but the delivery of the service is actually with another agency. And a classic example is something like disaster payments. If there's a flood or a bushfire, the people affected are eligible for disaster payments. That is usually by local government area or postcode, Those are often very political decisions which have to be implemented immediately. The actual agencies who do that are different to the one who pay it, who's actually Services Australia. So the content flows between the jurisdictions or between the agencies, and they can be jurisdictions as well. And what the content can be is actually a set of rules or a OpenFisca rules engine embedded in that particular process flow. So that's sort of where the future is going with this. We have some agencies who are very large agencies who are got some very passionate champions internally. So so I think the digital twin idea will take off as well in some of those agencies. And I'll just finish the answer by saying that the rules which some of these large agencies have, they have the rules already, but where they are, they're sitting in Fortran or COBOL on mainframes, and the code was written 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, and they've tried to sort of move them into expensive rules engines. I mean, they do have complex legislation and rules, but something like an open source, lightweight, easy to sort of implement rules engine is very attractive to people with that particular legacy they're trying to deal with.
Another benefit that we've found from the Sandpits is going through a rules as code process with the agencies. So we've had GovCMS people, finance and salsa people in these workshops, is that we've been discovering that some departments haven't actually been following the legislation. Their business team has been delivering services based on the website rather than policy. So it's been aligning policy, and it's been these SMEs, some of them were amazed that there were these clauses and there was these little bits that didn't make any sense, or there was a clause that would be circular and it wouldn't be able to be delivered. So going through this process of actually going through codifying it out, making rule statements out of it has actually been very helpful for them, just in way of actually reading the legislation, because a lot of business teams don't seem to be reading the legislation of which they're delivering.
So it's like an audit process rolled
Exactly.
into it at the same time. Fabulous. That's awesome. Very cool. How can people so this will go on YouTube after. So if people wanted to talk to you about these awesome projects and, you know, how you're doing them, or, you know, swap notes with other things that are happening, how could they find out more about this? Through Salsa, or through you, Michael and Jaden, or all of you?
all of the above. I mean, we're actually we're just revamping our pages on our GovCMS website. But yeah, I mean, govcms.gov.au has got that little thing at the top, rules as code, find out more. Salsa, the other thing I'll mention is that we actually have a government panel which we use called the Drupal Services Panel, and we've actually added Salsa Digital to that panel, and they've got a price book. So if people want to you know, use those prices, and it's quite a comprehensive package, they can invest in that themselves if they're not eligible for our sandpits. I mean, we've got a few limitations, like we're only providing one sandpit to each agency. There's sort of limited amount of hours we apply and things of that nature.
Yep. Wonderful. Thank you so much, guys. That's been fab. Very, very cool. Yeah, Matty, sorry, yeah, in the queue. Go for it, Matty.
Yeah. No, you were just asking how people could discover these experiments and chat about them. So on the OpenFisca website, we do have a dedicated showcase for all experiments and products that have been built with OpenFisca, and we would really love for you to share them, whether these experiments or the services that have already been put in production. We are currently missing any example of Australia. I tried to reach out to a few of you last year. Yeah, right now OpenFisca Australia is not on the map of OpenFisca experiments, even though you are some of the biggest producers. So it's really a shame, and I would love for you to add there. So I just shared the link to the documentation to do this. And if you need any assistance, you can reach out to us on the OpenFisca Slack or at contact@openfisca.org. We will be very happy to help you out with that. And since
Maddie,
yeah.
New South Wales community, I think New South Wales government did a community gaming check. Have you guys been in contact with them? Because I think that was published quite a while ago.
Yeah, and I would love for them to reference it.
All right.
So
I'll see what I can do about that, Maddie. I think everybody on the team that put that particular example together no longer is in that team. So that's probably why you can't get through to anyone.
Exactly.
We'll chat later. I'll see what I can work out.
This is magic, guys. Please do follow up, and we'll put the links also in the show notes and on the RaC Guild website as well, so that everybody can find them. Thank you. Brilliant.
And yeah, sorry, just another thing. I heard that there was a revamp of the website going on. You might have noticed that we changed the OpenFisca graphic charter and its logo a year and a half ago. So if you're changing if you're revamping the website anyways, it might be the right moment to also change the logos that you are using for OpenFisca.
Thanks, Maddie.
Brand ambassador too.
All right.
Cool. Tim.
Hi, everyone.
How
Sure.
are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. Thank you, Michael and Jaden, for a really cool presentation. I've been wondering what's been going on with GovCMS, and it was really good to see it in action. Let me just get my presentation up and running. Oh, it looks like it's going to be mad at me. Okay, cool. There we go. All right. So this is a very short, sharp case study of a piece of work that we did for an Australian state government last year. Basically, the job was to review some rules as code projects within the state government to understand what the opportunity was for rules as code based transformation in that government by drawing on the opportunities within that government and looking at examples from other governments within Australia and internationally. Maddie will be very glad to know that I put MESAIDs up in front of them almost immediately. And to therefore give them a hit list of things that they could do were they to build up an internal rules as code capability, much like GovCMS is doing now. We then shortlisted those opportunities, came up with a very lightweight kind of cost benefit statement for each one of them. And then we performed a full economic cost benefit analysis on a single opportunity. The entire purpose of this was to demonstrate to decision makers that this was a sensible business decision, that investments in rules as code would deliver significant benefits for the community, and that therefore it was worth investing in. I was really excited to do this project because I feel that one of the things as a community, as a discipline that we've been lacking is a solid business case. And so the opportunity to build that was very, very enticing. So we did a number of information gathering exercises within the government. We came up with a few different options, and these are the 6 opportunities that we ended up shortlisting. Because it's a state government and the kind of the administration that they do, there were a lot of eligibility based rules. The state is in something of a building boom right now, so there was a lot around building licenses. What kind of buildings are going to need what is called a building manual, a set of instructions about all of the aspects of the building and things that will require maintenance. There was certification issues. So what kinds of trade work would require certification, with the intention of not only working out eligibility, but being able to automate the timing of trades and the timing of scheduling of certifiers. Housing alterations was another big one. The state in question, and Australia in general, has very strict housing development rules. So there was a question as to whether you needed a full-blown development consent, a process that can take up to 2 years, or a much smaller and shorter and less administratively rigorous complying development certificate, which could be done in 1 or 2 months. There was a disaster assistance proposal, much like the one that Michael mentioned before, which is you've had a flood, there's been a forest fire, are you eligible for immediate assistance? How can we speed that application on its way? And then a very small one, school travel passes. When do you get a school travel pass? When do you get a little bit of extra allocation? For example, if you're a rural student, the rules around this were a bit complicated because it wasn't just if you're a student. You had to be a student. You had to be a student that was a certain amount of distance from a school, and that distance could be in time or in kilometers. So whether you had a bus that could get you there or whether you had to be driven there, there were different allocations, different kinds of funding that were available. So there are a few different options. The one that we ended up going with was specifically around the housing alterations code. So the question of whether your proposed building development, residential development, required a complying development certificate. So for example, if you were building a deck in the back garden, do you need a development consent for that, or do you need a complying development certificate? The objective here was to deal with a specific problem, which was small-scale developments that could have had a complying development certificate were going down the development applications pathway. And as a result, they were going through much longer assessment processes, taking up a lot more time from local council certifiers and assessors, and causing delays in development that weren't necessarily required. So the idea was, if we made it easier to understand the rules that rules around eligibility for development assessments, development consents, or for complying development certificates, we could make sure that the right kinds of development were going down the right consent pathway. And by doing that, we would reduce regulatory load on council assessors. So we did a number of interviews with the state government, with local councils, with private certifiers, with developers, and we came up with their pain points, and that allowed us to create assumptions around costs and benefits, which I won't go through on the screen. It's easy enough to read. Ultimately, what we came to was there was a clear business case to invest in a rules as code enabled solution for working out whether development required a complying development certificate or a development assessment, and then using rules as code based transformations to automate or semi-automate parts of the applications processes. And for each $1 invested, our model showed that the rules as code enabled solution would deliver $2.61 in benefits. So nearly a 3-to-1 return on investment. Beyond that, I might throw to my colleague Anthony Caminos, who's with me on the call right now. He's one of the economists who did the lion's share of the work on building the economic model, and I thought he might want to talk a little bit about the assumptions that were used to create this 3-for-1 return on investment. Anthony?
Yeah, so hello, my name is Anthony. I work with Tim in the Sydney office. The 3-to-1 investment really comes down to looking at the cost of firstly building out the application, building out the API, getting everything all set up over an 18-month period. And then the benefit that we are actually assessing is how many applications move from the development application stream to the CDC stream, being the streamline stream, and how much time is taken off the assessors, being the New South Wales government, in basically pushing all of these applications through and making it quicker and easier for developments to be built. So the time saved is what we're actually addressing as the benefit here. And we actually look at the time saved basically as a proportion of the average development of a DA application. And then we bring that down across, I think it was 47 days that were saved. across a daily interest rate to bring it down back to present terms. And then that culminates in a valuation of about $7.1 million against costs of 2.1 for the build out, and then administration costs from government to set everything up in the back end of another 1 million. And so that's where you get that 3-to-1 valuation that we've got over here.
And those benefits continue year on year as long as you continue with the new system. So yeah, this is why I had Anthony join the call, because there's no way I could have explained any of that. I went to law school and economics is a closed book to me. So what this gives us is a really solid business case for the transformation. And the benefits are not just in terms of time saved for individuals, but the knock-on effects of, for example, having housing come online sooner. The more applications you put into the complying development stream, the less time you are taking away from other applications that are in the development consent stream. So that means other applications, people trying to build houses, get processed faster, those houses get built sooner, and that is kind of an important thing when you're living through a cost of living crisis and a housing crisis, and we're trying to bring more housing online faster. Those benefits were not assessed in our $2.61. But they could be in future models. So that is kind of the speed run through the case study. We wanted to leave some time for questions, so hit us.
So, yeah, great. Somebody else can start us off. Great, please do.
I just had a question about in terms of the benefits and I guess the business case for rules as code. Did you guys have a look at the anything about the maintenance of the rules as code solution? Because rules as code is a process and it's not a set and forget thing. So it's something that needs to be maintained and updated. Was that considered in the benefit?
That was,
Anthony, I'll let
yes.
you field that one.
Yeah, thank you. So that was, I believe we had annual costs of around 200K just on 2 software developers to keep it up and running. And then also one overarching director that would just oversee it over the course of a year. That is actually assessed in the CBA side of things. So that is part of the cost of government that I was talking about. So the present value across a 10-year period, which we assessed, came to about $1 million, which is how much would cost to keep this actually up and going. And then in the CEA, which is a cost effectiveness analysis part of it, we also did look at if you were to implement new changes or put in new policies or new little quirks to the system, how much that would cost. But that's in the back end of the report. And again, it's around that 500K mark over a 10-year period when brought down to present value terms.
So we were really trying here to make sure that there would be ongoing capability within the government to continue not only to maintain this project, but to build out new projects. And so part of the assumptions were that the government in question would set up a rules as code capability that was fully staffed with policy experts, software developers, the full multidisciplinary skill set. Part of the assumptions for this particular model was that these people would be available. And so we factored in part of their time as maintenance time, but we also assumed that they would be able to work on other projects during that period. Michael, I think you've got your hand up, and then let's go to Matty.
Yeah, just with ROI and cost benefit, you've got the sort of dollar figures. Just wondering how you dealt with secondary benefits or intangible benefits, or happier users or opportunity costs, those sort of things. Which, and the reason I'm asking, just in the federal sphere, we aren't allowed to use those, and I'm just wondering how you dealt with that, if you did.
Yeah. So in this particular model, we were kind of like hewing pretty close to the Treasury CBA guidelines for that particular state. So we were really measuring in terms of dollars, and so dollars and time were mainly what we were going for. But we did suggest factoring in human impacts. using some of the approaches that are used to measure human impacts and human benefits. I think we would have had even more benefit if we had been allowed to measure things like happier users because they're getting their development consents faster, or but that wasn't a factor in this particular one. Anthony, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I'm just trying to bring it up on my end, but we did have a list of 3 that were secondary impacts that we did look at, but we could not quantify. That one being mainly happiness. Just give me 1 second. You can continue talking the back if necessary.
Yeah. So when we delivered the CBA, we did talk about, hey, there are all these secondary impacts that will contribute to the well-being of the community and the well-being of all of the different user groups, but we weren't factoring them in here. So what we were doing was presenting a very conservative business case because we were appealing to a conservative audience, being, Treasury and the state government. So we didn't want to get too esoteric in secondary impacts, but they were part of the discussion.
And so, yeah, and also just for notice, when you're doing a CBA for a tech venture or something to do with technology that is untested, there's a lot of parameters which is basically just chucked out the door because you don't know how like an actual software, because it basically once built, its marginal cost moving forward is 0. So there's all those factors that have to be considered as well. But we only looked at the build-out costs, the maintenance costs, and then that single benefit factor being time saved across, again, $90 an hour against 47 days against the average value cost. And it's a bunch of formulas behind it in an Excel sheet that I can show if necessary, but maybe not today.
Okay, now just, I understand the answer. Great, thank you.
Matty, I think you were next.
Yeah, annoying question. Can we get the full paper?
I would love that, but the government in question was not okay with us releasing it. I am going to ask them again though, and Anthony and I would be happy to have a chat with you offline and tell you a bit more about it.
I mean, it's not really for me, it's just like this is one of the rare cases, one of the rare papers that does provide this very serious economical case. So it's not so much for me to discuss them. I mean, I think and thank you so much for the presentation. I think we got a lot of it. It's really having this paper as a reference that's publicly available. I'm very happy to send you an email with more or less official wording that can help you to forward it to your to the government. Would that be useful?
That would be great. Please do that. In the meantime, I have written a public article about it, so at least the number is out there. The Venture Center, I think, is next.
Yeah, Joe.
Oh, Joe, sorry.
That's all right. That's okay. Awesome. And didn't disappoint having read the article, and I dropped the link to your article on the Mandarin in the chat for people as well. Again, I've got so many questions from a community perspective. The bit that you just said was kind of esoteric. Other things that we're really interested in, right? From a community perspective, and also from an impact investors perspective, right? Like governments can't pay for all of it. There are philanthropics that want to see good outcomes, and they like partnering with government to get shit done. Sometimes, right? And they're interested in the esoteric measures, right? So using like Iris Plus or Impact Point or the GIN measurements or any of those impact measurements to measure the human end of it. So not happiness, but there is a raft of different impact measures that you could be using as well that are well recognized and also can become investment vehicles as well. So
absolutely,
I'd really encourage you to have a look at all of those impact measurement and include those as well, and have a dig into the market for impact bonds, etc. Happy to help you if you want connections into that space, because that's where I'm working. So that's
it would be great to talk about that a bit more. We are aware of a few different human benefit impact measures. And certainly, I'm aware that Home Affairs Department of Home Affairs in Australia are looking at applying those measures for these kinds of scenarios. We would have loved to do it in this case. It was just out of scope.
Yeah. Shame.
Ron, I think you've...
Next project, you never know.
Well, yeah. The problem with being a consultant is you need to find someone to pay you to do it. So we're still looking for the next opportunity.
Well, showing this to some of those people that are looking to buy impact is the way to go with this, right?
Exactly.
Like, that's who you need to be speaking to, not the government departments, right?
Yep.
Different market to look at. Anyway, other question is, so what is the again network for this, right? Because we've got very few rules as code experts, right? We've got very few agile people that can run these projects. We have to train up civil servants to understand this approach, how to do this. You know, there is a economic issue, which is the talent and the skill to do this, right? So in your cost benefit analysis, did you have a think about how any of this could be automated with AI? Because the adoption is going to be so, do you know what I mean? It's such a big deal.
Yeah,
if it's
absolutely.
Humans.
So one of the things I've been looking at in the last few weeks is to what extent can we, like, the problem has always been, like, we don't have a lot of lawyers who can code. We don't have a lot of coders who naturally or intuitively understand how to parse legislation. That's always been the kind of like throughput restriction. And our solution to date has been to get those people, lawyers, coders, policy experts, lock them in a room until they learn to talk to each other. And that works,
yeah,
but it doesn't work at scale. But one of the things that large language models turn out to be pretty good at is converting prose into Python, following formal logic. So I'm aware of quite a lot of experimentation around that, and that could help with a lot of the backlog, translating existing rules into code that can work with OpenFisca or whatever rules engine you happen to be using. But still at the experimentation phase. I think ultimately we'll still need to build up that workforce, and that will take time. But you build up that workforce by doing the work, and if it goes a little slowly at first, then that's the price of learning. I think something you mentioned before, there's a lot of people that are interested. In this particular use case, all the local councils were thrilled with the concept, right?
Sure.
They really wanted to be a part of this. They really wanted to see the solution built. And then they went, but we have no resourcing and we couldn't possibly help, which that is a long-standing problem for local councils. But it's also a long-standing problem that state governments can help and support, right? If we are coding the rules and making them available via API, it's making the council's adoption of it a lot easier. But like all digital transformation, the adoption timeline is long, and we just have to knuckle down and be in it for the long haul. Like I've been working on rules as code for 5 years now. It doesn't really feel like that, and we've come a long way. But at the same time, sometimes it feels like we're moving at a crawl.
I'm entrepreneurial at heart, and I'm always looking ways to speed and scale, right? Because the human end of it, the community end of it, the suffering is now. Can't afford to wait a decade for everybody to get trained up to do this, right? So how can it be accelerated? Because the other thing is the impact that's required right now. We need the houses now. In New Zealand, we've got, like, we need 100,000 houses yesterday.
So there's a lot of really interesting rules as code stuff going on in the planning space in particular, especially in Australia. Planning rules are extremely arcane, complex. They're very difficult for laypersons to understand. And so the idea that you could codify the rule set around building standards, making it easier to work out whether your proposed building complies with those standards, could really speed up the development approvals process, which would mean that houses start getting built sooner, they get built to code, and housing comes online faster. Dr. Claire Daniel at UNSW is doing a lot of really good work in that space. So if that's something that's of interest to you, it would be worth checking in with her.
It certainly is. The Housing Innovation Society in New Zealand is working on, you know, how we can bring innovation into the entire complex, you know, system that is delivery of housing. And, you know, solutions like this are things that, if some of that impact money, rather than going into community housing providers who get stuck with all of the compliance stuff, which adds extra cost and extra time, if some of that money can be directed to this first, alongside government, right, it would speed the whole process.
Exactly. Like, this is one component of the planning process.
Yeah.
There are so many other things with prescriptive rule sets where a rules as code transformational approach would be so beneficial. And I will say that I shamelessly stole this use case from Wellington City Council, which had Hamish Fraser and Nadia Webster working on a rules as code enabled development consent checker. So we stole that and we built upon it. But there are so many other elements of the planning workflow that could easily be codified and that could be automated or semi-automated in a way that would make development approvals much less painful. Con, you had a question there.
Yeah, look, others in the room, like Maddie and others, have got the war stories to talk about, you know, all the time as they've spoken to government, and, you know, and people get excited, like you mentioned, Tim, get really excited about, you know, what this could deliver, but then don't have the resources or higher up authority to actually execute. And I just shout out to, you know, GovCMS, who are offering these free sandpits to try to actually speed this up, make it real, give agencies no excuse but to just try it, and then build a business case. And then when we get to the business case, that's where your cost benefit analysis obviously is very interesting. And maybe with the business case, I don't know if this is possible. I'm not an economist. I know Anthony's just dropped off, but you know, just maybe some frameworks around how you do a business case, you know, for rules as code, methodology, anything that can be shared in the public space around how people can build business cases. Government agencies in particular can build business cases which can help them. And sure, if they need something more sophisticated, they can come to you or other experts, but at least some starting point, some template, some methodology.
That's definitely doable. For this one, we used an approach that had been developed by the Treasury Department of the particular state government around valuing the benefits of technology implementations. We specifically did that because we were trying to speak to the people who are holding the purse strings in the language that they understand. I like the idea of developing a bespoke approach for rules as code-based projects in particular, where we can bring in some of the human impacts and have that formally as part of the assessment, because I will say that the 1 to 2.61 was the middle of our spectrum of valuations. The top end was 10 to 1. So we were deliberately being extremely conservative because we wanted it to be unimpeachable, but an optimistic view would have had the benefits be much, much larger. Matty, I think you had a question, and then Joe.
No, just a reaction to the point we were making earlier with LLMs potentially being useful for transforming natural rules into Python or whichever language. I want to share maybe one webinar that we at OpenFisca set up last month with one team in France that has been experimenting with exactly that to extract parameters from legislation. This is, to me, the most advanced example I've seen, and I find it quite interesting how you realize when with their detailed explanations how it's not just it's not making the LLM eat the thing and spit out the code, but a very, very specific task, and the LLM is just one bit in a bigger pipeline. I think that's the only safe way I've seen that done. In general, I am personally extremely doubtful and about such approaches using LLMs, because the cost of a hallucination would be extremely high in the context of rules as code, and there's no way we can really reduce it. So in the case that was in the case study that we have, the original code that is written is only really specifically for parameters, so something that is easy to check and not interpretation. It's simply finding out which value is where and formatting it properly, but not about actually implementing rules, only values, and then it is reviewed by a human. However, I want to point out one use case that I find, on the other hand, very promising, and it's the other way around. It is using LLMs to create natural, human-readable language versions of formal rules that were formalized by humans. Because there, I can trust the LLM way more to do this work. It's much easier to check if there are hallucinations, and this still has a lot of value. So, if we take the example that was given in the first presentation, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of that one, but there was also a demonstration how all the rules were then listed in an easily readable list of rules. This, for example, could be, from my perspective, would be an interesting experiment to try and generate with an LLM from the rules that have been formalized within OpenFisca. In that case, I believe this bridge is way more likely to work and more promising. That's it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight, Maddie. The part of Joe's question before that I didn't answer about speeding things up is I don't see the use of LLMs speeding up code drafting. We still want to go through the process of, developing isomorphism between the human and machine readable rules. But it's never. I'm a deep skeptic of generative AI, right? I don't feel like it's going to replace the human, but I realize I feel like it's going to be a useful augmentation, providing that we have sufficient skill to do the human-based assurance.
Yeah.
We're still early days. Jaden, you've got a question.
Not so much a question, just wanted to give a bit of a brief overview of my uni project, which was speeding up the process of encoding rules with AI. So this wasn't so much a citizen-facing thing. It was sponsored by a government department where they were looking at streamlining the process, going from legislation to turning that into OpenFisca. So what we customize a large language model to read legislation and extract eligibility criteria in a JSON format, which would then be reviewed by humans. So this is nothing going into another system. It was more of like an assistance tool for someone, because legislation is so complex and there are lots of discretionary and prescriptive, all these sort of clauses that are just jumbled together. So we created something where we'd ask it something very specific and it could extract that out. So it acts as a bit of a starting point, a bit of a help with a bit like a brainstorm, where you can have a bit of an idea of the legislation and the eligibility that goes into it. And we had things where it's pulling out values as well. So you have, say, a child less than 16 years old is eligible for this. So in the JSON format, the value would be child and the number would be less than 16. So it was able to pull out all of these things, and it was a very short project. So we found that computing power was a real issue, where it would just not be able to get, like, say, one of the pieces that we put in was 80 pages of legislation. Half of that was not usable, and it didn't need all this extra context. But with large language models, then it's not generative AI. So we found it didn't really hallucinate. It was more just, it either got too much context and then added something that we thought we wanted, or it didn't have enough context. So it was just a bit of a time issue that we had there, but we were able to generate quite some quite good results just for the starting point of rules as code. So nothing in terms of actually generating code that was ready to go. More just, that starting point, which is really hard for rules as code process.
Do you have a paper on that, Jaden?
Yeah, where can we find your work, Jaden?
We have a GitHub, which is, I think It's been archived, but I'm sure I can share a couple of things, because we did the project all as, it was meant to be open source, but I might have to check with the department if they're happy for us to share anything. but I'd
Awesome.
be happy to share something. Yeah.
That'd be great to read.
Fantastic.
We can put it up on the RaC Guild resource website if you have it.
Yeah. All of this on the RaC Guild resources, along with the transcript and the video on YouTube. We've gone way over time, gents. Thank you very much for everybody coming along this evening or this morning or this afternoon, wherever it is, wherever you are. Appreciate it. We will be getting back together again in September, on the first Wednesday of September, which I believe is the 4th. There'll be an email that will have the links to everything that we've talked about this evening. Please share it with your colleagues and your departments and your clients and whoever you're working with, because the more people that we can get together, the quicker that we can code the world's rules and speed everything up, right? So yeah, that's the name of the game. Hand-to-hand combat. Share it with your people and your network. And thank you very much for awesome questions. And Tim and Michael, thank you. Wonderful.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Have a
Thanks.
good evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Kia ora.
Thank you for the organization.
Stop the recording.